Now, we are joined in the studio by Solange Mougin. Solange, great to see you. You're here as part of our D-Day coverage to talk about a very specific object that made a difference for many American vets as they inched their way across Normandy.
Yeah, when it comes to things that we talk about the heroes that they carried on D-Day, much attention is often given to how chewing gum, Lucky Strike cigarettes, even Coca-Cola and Levi jeans arrived on France's shores with the Battle of Normandy. But few know that in the 30 kilos of gear that American officers carried, there was a book. And this book was entirely in French. It was the Michelin Guide, the very same one that's been published since 1900 to help travelers find good restaurants, the famous Michelin stars. Now, the reason American soldiers carried it is because of all of the other useful information that the book had, namely some 600 detailed maps, as well as other tidbits like how much automobile weight certain bridges could carry, or, for example, where gas stations and garages were located. And this was essential because most road signs were destroyed either by the Nazis or the bombs. Now, why didn't GIs just use military maps? Well, they often were not as good as the Michelin ones, which were a 1 to 200,000 scale. Actually, just before the war, in 1938, the French army actually signed a partnership with Michelin, but then, of course, the war came and that didn't fruit.
Now, Solange, tell us about the actual guidebook, because it was in French, so presumably the GIs couldn't read it. Was it that different than the original?
Well, it was actually a carbon copy, except for a few cosmetic things. First and foremost, it was not red, and it remains the only one that is not red. This is because the flashiness of that color, well, it could have caught the enemy's eye. Another difference is on the cover. It says, for official use only and reproduced by the Military Intelligence Division. And then, as Le Monde tells us, the rest, or all 1,100 pages of it, well, it's exactly the same. With relatively easy-to-use alphabetized towns. And beyond that, l'Américain, or as the collectors call the book, well, it was printed on cheaper paper and weighed some 700 grams. It was quite heavy, it was a book to carry. As for why the U.S. Army chose to reprint this specific 1939 version, well, it was actually the last one that was printed before the war. Now, we don't know exactly how many copies were made, but few withstood the conditions of the war. So at auction, the very rare copies that exist, they fetch for thousands of euros, and sometimes they even fetch for more than the first editions from 1900.
And whose brilliant idea was this?
Well, this has remained a bit of a mystery, but there is one theory that is gaining traction. The idea is largely credited to the French officer, a French officer named Gustave Moutet, and he was part of the resistance, and he was working in the UK, helping plan D-Day, and he was surprised by the poor quality of the military maps. So he proposed his guidebook, which he had actually taken with him when he fled France in 1940. And there's little proof that, tangible proof that this happened. But collectors and even the Michelin company, they say that this theory does hold up. Michelin also says that the company was contacted by U.S. forces to reprint the book, and it said yes. But again, there is no tangible trace of that either, because working against the Nazis, well, it was akin to a death sentence.
Now, of course, members of the Michelin family actually paid quite dearly for their resistance stance.
Yeah, the son and the grandson of one of the founders they were both deported. When the Nazis found out that Michelin was helping people escape to the UK, and he died in captivity in 1945. But his help and the guidebook were not the only ways that the Michelin company participated in the war. The darker side is that their factory, which was eventually razed to the ground by Allied bombs, well, it made tires and machines for the Germans, as it had been taken over by the Nazis. But the company also says that their workers often secretly, they sabotage some of those tires. They managed to keep their workforce from being massively deported. And through their UK affiliate, their branch there, they provided tires and axles to Allied vehicles. also there is more map help. In August 1944, American troops who just liberated Paris, well, they needed maps to go further east. Michelin gave them their stock of 190,000 copies of Eastern France, Belgium, and Germany, but more was needed. And Michelin printed 194,000 copies in more than a single week. And since there was actually so little paper, they actually used the backs of old Nazi maps. So needless to say, the Bibendum, or the Michelin Man, has a very rich and a Franco-American history.